my hope and my word is always out to local residents is, if you see anything that says we need your feedback on things, whether it's to do with our local board, your schools, our Auckland plan, as boring as it may sound, like, give time to it, because it's going to impact you, it's going to impact your children, it's going to impact infrastructure, it's going to impact your life. It really is.
This podcast is proudly supported by the Ōtara Network Action Committee, ONAC, community-owned, community-driven and community-led.
Kia ora mai tātou, ko Judy Speight ho, and this week I'm back with a brand new mini-series in our We Are Ōtara series of our local leaders and local people telling their stories. Our mini-series is called Local Leaders, and we're bringing you a series of 3 podcasts over 3 weeks, or thereabouts, that's going to introduce you to our elected leaders on the local board. Today we've got Swanie Nelson. At our next one we're going to have the amazing Tōpō Whanau, and then our elected chair, Apulu, who will share with us his reflections, I guess, and his plans for the next period ahead. So the thing that makes these guys all stand out is that they are amazing in their own selves. They also all bring for us an incredible career. I mean, in Swanie's case, she had international leadership roles working in the NGO sector, but bringing her own little piece of Ōtara joy and delight and energy into that area. She's brought all that home, which is incredible, home to Ōtara and home to share with us. So I'm not going to jump on her fanfare. I'm not going to jump on anything. I'm just going to go straight into a great discussion with Swanie Nelson, local board member for Otara-Papatoetoe. Kia ora.
Kia ora, and thank you, Judy, for having me on this podcast. I'm here in Ōtara, if you can see my t-shirt.
Woohoo!
Ko whakatere te maunga, ko waima te awa, tuhirangi rawa ko tātara te marae, ngā tuki mo te whaoro te waka, te mahurihuri te hapu, no Ōtara ahau, ko Swanie toku ingoa. It's been awesome to be on this podcast. I like to say still young Māori wahine, born and bred here in Ōtara. I have 2 beautiful young children, who also attend an amazing kura here in Ōtara. And I'm married to a wonderful man named Terry Nelson, who is also a kaimahi here in Ōtara. He's a career advisor at Tangaroa College. And, as you would know, I'm very, very proud to be somebody who is born and bred and who lives and breathes the Ōtara way. And it's been an absolute privilege over the past, I would say, 2.5 decades, doing mahi in my community and then transitioning out from being on the ground grassroots mahi to, in the last 3 to 4, well, now I'm in my second term, now serving on the Otara-Papatoetoe local board. And so that's where I'm at the moment. I've done a lot through my life. I don't know how much you want to know. You let me know.
All of it. Why don't we start from Mum and Dad? Were Mum and Dad born and bred here too? Did they come to Ōtara?
Yes, so my parents, I guess you could say urban Māori, from the Ngāpuhi, the far north, they moved down to Ōtara back in the days when Ōtara didn't have that much infrastructure, if you remember back then. And then a lot of the Ormiston wasn't even developed then. I still remember those days. It was still farmland. We still had things like in the town centre, there used to be, believe it or not, there used to be a water fountain in there, guys. And
under the finish?
Yeah, inside the Ōtara town centre. So if you go where Folson's is, there was it was like a pebble structure one. It was a good sized one because as kids we liked to jump in there when my parents were shopping in the town centre and just dip your feet. But I believe years later they got rid of it because of health and safety purposes. But I always think these days,
consistent.
We should bring that water fountain back because it was a key feature. And I'm sure those who have been around there will remember that water fountain feature. Even back in the days then when we were young, my parents were quite heavy in sport. We used to play netball I was a lot younger then, but we had a whānau team. And believe it or not, before the markets were there used to be a netball court. Mm-hmm. And so we used to, it's hard to even imagine that used to happen, but we would turn up there and the whole of the back car park would be filled with netball teams playing netball in the Newberry car park. So some amazing memories. My father used to work on the power board, which is just around the back down here, moving towards what we now know as Highbrook. So he walked on the power board trucks and did a lot of mahi in the Ōtara community. And my mum, when we had moved down, she actually worked in the factories. So I remember a lot of her jobs. She went through a number of factories, but I remember growing up, one of them in particular, my mum used to punch holes into the buttons of jackets. My mum used to do that, and she used to work the overnight shift hours. And so sometimes I used to go to work with my mum in those factories. I wasn't working, but I'd just go with her to keep her company because she'd be one of the very few in that factory working. And I'd literally sit and sleep in a pile of jackets. It probably wasn't allowed back then, but no one knew about it. So sorry to that company now. But I remember having these memories, sleeping in the jackets, and my mum just like hearing this chick for hours and hours. So my parents were very humble workers who did the best that they can to provide, a safe home and also food on the table, a roof over our heads, and ensuring we could have Kai going to school every day, doing these jobs growing up. So I always remember the amazing work ethic that my whānau had growing up here in Ōtara, and that I guess a lot of that did transfer over to me in the way that I run my household, how I treat my children, the values and the tikanga that we hold. And I guess a lot of the mahi that I have been doing over the last 2 decades and continue to do here in Ōtara. For a number of time, I had moved through a number of different industries growing up, but I ended up finding myself always going back to community development and working with rangatahi. And I initially did that through my church. So I went to church very young, in my life, and was actually mentoring the rangatahi from the age of, when I was 18, I was mentoring like 10, 11, 12-year-olds. So that's where my youth journey actually started, mentoring.
Yeah, I guess that was going to be my next question.
Yeah.
So where did that sort of, the surge to serve come from?
That's where it started. It actually started in the church. I attended a church here in Clover Park, and spent many of my years there actually, I guess you could call it mentoring, working with younger children. And eventually over time, I think I developed certain things about me that I realized, like compassion and empathy, right? So anywhere there were spaces where I was able to put that into practice, because I just had a love for people. Compassion and empathy just were always at the forefront of what I did, then I would be there. And so I remember a number of years as I got older, my first job actually was working for an international aid and development agency. And that was...
Had you done some training for that? Or that
no,
was just zero.
I just landed it, and I happened to have I was going through some, things in my life at that time, and a person in my church said, hey, I'm working for this amazing organization. She saw that I guess I had really good work ethic. I was someone who could be trusted. And she said, how about I try and get you a job there? And she got me the job. Wow. And that's where actually I didn't go to university. I didn't go tech. I actually dropped out of school in sixth form. And I went straight into the workforce.
So what college were you at?
I was at Auckland Girls. Yeah. Okay. And a funny story about this, right? Because I went to Dawson Primary School. Then I went to what was, Clover Park at the time. It wasn't Kia ora, it was Clover Park. I was one of the few new students that were in the new Māori unit that was developed back then. And then after that, my parents were like, oh, I'm not going to be sending you to this. The only college close to me was Tangaroa College.
Where my mother was the guidance counsellor.
Tangaroa College. And, my whānau, like my parents took in a lot of my cousins growing up, and a lot of them, they went to Tangaroa College and they were real mischief, So I think my parents thought, oh no, we ain't going to send you there. And so, they were like, no, you're not going to go there. We're going to send you to Auckland Girls. And at that time, there was a high number of actual parents that were sending their daughters that were living in Ōtara and Clover Park to Auckland Girls. I was one of them. We all used to catch the bus, the 497, 457. Everyone knows those buses. And we bussed every day to Auckland Girls and back.
How long did it take?
Man, it was a journey, like an hour. But then when you got to the city, you've got to walk from Simon Street. You got to pass all of those unsavoury buildings, if you know what I'm talking about, as you get closer to the end, halfway through K Road. So those are the things I got exposed to. But really funny, they're like, oh no, we don't want you to go there and we don't want you to date a boy there. And a few years later, I ended up meeting an amazing guy. I married him and he was a Tangaroa college student. And he literally went back to pursue his dream job. And now he's the careers advisor at Tangaroa College. So isn't that amazing how life kind of does that? Yeah, I just can't avoid TC. So, yeah, I've just embraced it now. So those 5 years, the organisation was amazing. It's called Tier Fund, and they do a lot of amazing work in third world countries across the world. I spent 5 years of my life, like, actually learning life and learning skills that you'd probably learn at college, university and tech. Got to travel the world as well. So I think that's another thing that early on formed the way that I was at a very young age. I was fortunate to travel to third world countries, spent a lot of time, you wouldn't believe it, actually auditing projects between the ages of 22 to 25. And I remember spending
auditing Kiwi projects or international
projects. Yeah. So I remember one of the travels that I did at that very young age was I spent like a month in Mexico. I started at the top and I traveled all the way down to the borders of Guatemala, checking all the projects that we had been financially contributing to. And I was sponsoring a child too at the same time at that young age. So I got to visit the child and meet the family that I'd been sponsoring for those years. And it's kind of weird. I don't know if it's weird when you think about it now that at those ages, and when I reflect back on my life, like, oh my goodness, like at that age I was doing quite adult things, mature things, but I think a lot of that had to do with the people I was surrounding myself with at the time.
But also mum and dad and their
mum and dad, church influences and the workplace that I was in, which was very much compassion work driven, So that actually set the tone for where I am. It really did, where I am now. And I loved it. And I got to move through a lot of different other spaces in community youth development. I became an executive for an amazing organisation called IOSIS Family Trust, which is in Manurewa, and they do amazing work around supervised contact and working with families and counselling. During that time, I became a Vodafone World of Difference recipient, and they paid for me to actually work and create projects in Ōtara. So for about 2 years, there was an existing trust. They put me as the CEO, and I worked to help build the capabilities of that trust. We were based in the Clover Park Community House back then, but we were running amazing performing arts programs out of OMAC and out of the REC during that time.
Wow.
Yeah. And when I look back at those photos, I think, oh my goodness, it's wonderful to see that.
That was after Paulie though.
That was after
Paulie.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So what an amazing kind of foundation to be building from.
Yeah, it was, all of that stuff. And it was called Canopy Trust, Care and Nurture Pacific Youth. That was the name of the trust back then. And then through then it just moved into other things. I ended up working for another amazing organisation called AMPT. So AMPT go into different parks all around South Auckland and they try and activate those areas for young people who are just frequenting those spaces and move them into leadership programs. So at the time, council didn't have a youth leadership program. So I actually designed the one that they used. And you'll know some of that work today because some of it still exists through the breakaway programs, all of those things. So I was there right at the beginning of those. And it just moved on to things. So there was a whole range of things I was doing. And one day, me and my husband were sitting down there and we had this epiphany. We were like, you know what? We're doing so much. Like, it's so much good work and it's awesome. But we just wanted to take a step back and let's just focus on our backyards. And this is where our neighbourhood stuff actually happened. We actually said, I stepped out of the organisations I was working with, which were amazing organisations, but all the focus was around South Auckland. And I just wanted to focus on Ōtara because there was so much happening at that time.
So much opportunity, but so much need as well.
So much needed. And I felt, and there was amazing people doing stuff, but in my mind, I thought, you know what, I've been able to develop these skills and these connections and these networks. I can use these to benefit and put back into my community. And that was the premise at the time, and my husband fully supported it because we're like-minded. And so
this is where your entrepreneurial endeavour was created, the driver's licensing?
Yeah. I mean, the licensing stuff was
such a critical thing.
That was happening. My husband had been working in the youth development space for years. And so when he was working with the young people, he was like, you know, all these young people to get to independence a lot quicker. There's tohu you need, right? CVs, ID, blah, blah, blah. But the licensing was an issue. And if you look at the road code, it's like 400 plus pages that you've got to comprehend to pass the learner license test. And all the rangatahi that my husband were working with and I was, they just, you know, they wouldn't sit down, digest that or go through things, and a lot were failing. And so we took the road code, and over about a year, we've redeveloped it to create a curriculum that helps Māori Pacifica to digest, comprehend, and pass it a lot easier. And that's how Let's Get Legal NZ got developed. Yeah. And it was a free resource that we put out. So those things were happening. But when we wanted to focus back on Ōtara, it was like, what's the best thing we could do? And it was like, connect neighbours.
Yeah.
Connect. So we started with our street. We just started with us, and we became official street leaders. We made nobody nominated us, by the way. So we just made ourselves a street leader, and it literally
stepped up, I think.
Stepped up. And the quickest way, I knew strategies, and I said, look, we've got access to bread. This is actually how it started, guys. We had access to bread because we were supporting families. We're like, now let's take that bread and we're going to knock on our neighbours' doors and offer bread to our neighbours. And that's how
and be
it started.
Intentional about.
Be intentional, yeah. So we'd just knock on our neighbours' doors, literally every single door, and be like, hi neighbour, my name is Swanie. This is my husband Terry, and we just wanted to give you guys some bread. We've got some resources here, and let us know if you need any help. That's how it started. And then after a year, like through that period of time, we were just trying to find, you know, what things are happening in Ōtara that our neighbours don't know about, that we can make aware to our neighbours, you know. And some of them, like there was this amazing Mokaraka Kai initiative. Unfortunately, the organisation is operating anymore, but what they did at the time, which many people don't know about, is they were offering free garden setups. You got all of the soil, startup seedlings, and they provided you with a mentor for a whole year. So we set that up in our street, and we went around, you know, we had to go knock on our neighbours' doors first and said, who's interested in this? And a high number of them did. And so things like that, like looking what's available, what would give our whānau value and what do they need, and trying to connect those dots and make it available to them. So a lot of those things happened, and you know, even if we called meetings with our street, only some would come because some people aren't the type of people that want to socialise, right? And so one year we thought, shall we try and do something a bit different? Let's do streetlights, Christmas streetlights.
I don't remember that.
The Christmas streetlights. And we had no money. You know what? We had nothing. We had zero. But by that stage, we were so well connected with our street, and all the youth on our street were like, they loved us. So we're like, let's get all the young people, because they finish school usually around October, November, right? It's like they've got nothing to do from here. What if we made it a project? And thankfully it worked. They all jumped on board, and we started doing these videos like rallying support, like, does anybody want to donate, you know, lights to us? And we sent like mails out to Trade Me. Lots of people saying, we've got nothing. Can you guys give us solar lights? And had to be solar because, you know, power, like, you know, many of the houses on my street were beneficiaries. So we needed to make sure that we weren't going to do things that were going to increase their bills. So solar power was the way to go.
Oh, and there were those Mercury handouts of free light bulbs and lights.
Yep, but that came afterwards.
Oh, did it?
Yeah, and what I've always learned with community-led projects is don't overthink things, just start.
Just do it. Yeah.
Just do it, because eventually what happens is people see like, oh, they're mobilised, they've got people believe in it. They're actually trying to make an effort. I'm going to get behind that. And I've seen it happen every single time throughout all the years I've done this. Like, and I always tell people that you don't have to have the full picture. Just start with what you have. It may not be what you want in the first year, but you stick with it, be consistent, it'll grow and grow. And that's what happened with the streetlights. First year, we only had like a quarter of Cooper Crest. By the second year, we had over 30,000 people come to Ōtara. The congestion through the streets in the town centre was absolutely crazy. We couldn't believe it. Our point of difference was like, we tapped into our cultural capital. Like, we've got amazing cooks, and you'd come down the street and not only see lights, you'd also be able to stop and get like Tongan food, Cook Island food, hangis. You had like different musicians. You had our churches, from all over the place playing on the corners. It was incredible. And still to this day, it's an amazing event. We had to take a break the year before because of COVID, but we brought it back last year again, restarted it. And it's just been one of those amazing community-led kaupapa that have been, I don't know, it's one of a kind, eh?
Did you see an opportunity to like help people with food and safety, health and safety measures, like, food handling certification and things like that? Could be a platform for more learning.
We're quite lucky because a high number of the residents on our street actually have their own startup businesses. We've got coffee cart owners, and there's a new one called Tu Whanau Kai, and they all have those things. But if you understand how the health and safety food handling laws work, you can actually run up to 3 fundraisers for free without those certificates per annum.
Okay,
as a fundraiser. Yeah.
Just have some best practice around food handling.
There is, yeah. And generally, like, when we go around, like, a lot of those families that are doing those things, someone does oversee it. They're not new to fundraisers. So, it's a regular. So wearing gloves and all those things, they do that.
Yeah.
But then to a degree, we don't micromanage certain things because legally.
Well, it takes the love out of it.
That's right, yeah.
So I'm hearing you, and just coming back, that your advice for someone, for local Ōtarians, setting something up in that vision that you really strongly put together was that, stay grassroots, be consistent, and just keep on going, even when nothing appears to be happening first, but create that groundswell.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. And I think, it's great. We've got well-resourced organisations, and we've got, us as local board and certain places that need to be doing their roles. But there's just some things that we can't do that only community can do. And an example I want to use is I've recently been following a small group from Ōtara, just a family who started this thing called Pātaka Kai for Animals. I don't know if you've seen that. It's a new initiative.
Yeah. Grove Crescent-based version of that.
Yeah, and all they do is it's a whānau here in Ōtara. They've only just come out recently. They are not funded, and they've just been resourceful and just saw a need. They're like, in Ōtara, we love our animals. Some need to, get support to pay for registration and all of that kind of stuff, and
food
and other things. But like if we're struggling to feed our own selves and our children, then of course, the animals are just going to left there. And they saw this need, and I've been following it, and to see the response from the community and how many people they've been actually helping in the community. There's no one else doing that here in Ōtara right now.
No.
Only this family. And that's what I mean. I just think you didn't need to be resourced or mobilized. You just needed to have, see a need and try something, put yourself out there and do it.
Marketing 101, actually, but sometimes people don't have the background of learning marketing. So you're here to share that with us. That's wonderful.
Born and raised here in Ōtara, I've seen how Ōtara was when I was young, the infrastructure, the issues, the challenges, the resourcing, what my parents went through, what my own children are going through, to where we are right now. And before I hopped on a local board, and you know what, I never ever thought I never actually aspired or even considered being in a space like this. I never, this was never ever part of my career goals or my future aspiration to be sitting in this space. And it just so happened, 3 years ago, someone said, I think it might be useful for you to be here because you've done a lot in the community. And I was like, I don't know, and I was really picky to the local board because when you see these challenges, why are we not getting upgrades in our playgrounds like all the other areas? How come our town centre still hasn't been revitalised? Why are our young people still not getting the bottom of the barrel when it comes to resourcing? Yet we look over here, they've been funded for this.
Why aren't there more pedestrian crossings on East Tamaki Road?
Why aren't there more pedestrian crossings? Why does Beds Road down their end still have potholes, and people are they use, especially around our area, their mobility scooters. There's no way they could use that. It's been fixed since then, by the way, guys, but all these questions and, I used to just think, man, they do nothing, like what are they doing, in these roles? Then I became fortunate to become, become a local board member. Yeah. Became a local board member in the last term. And can I say what a huge learning that has been to see how things actually work on the other side. The amount of challenges that are faced sitting as a board member here when you're having to try and advocate and push to the governing body that to have an equity lens over the way funds are distributed out to our local boards and having to convince them and having governing body members, majority of them, choose to vote or go another way is very difficult, even when you strongly advocate. We've got an incredible chair. If you see the things that he says and advocates in the background, he is a strong chair. But we're up against a lot of challenges, and that's why it's really important that when our community are voting for roles like a mayor, governing body members in different areas, you really need to get out and vote, because at the end of the day, even though we may advocate for things, if a majority feels no, we're going to vote this way, they're going to vote that way, and we're going to still be left in these things. This year we've got some big things happening with the new proposed Auckland plan, which I'm sure our chair will talk about. We're about to adopt, our new local board plan. We've just had a cyclone. We're already in debt with council, and there are a number of things that they're wanting to cut, including community funding and grants and even access to our local services. So like libraries would be reduced. There's a number of things. So
on the CAB.
Oh, a lot. So one of the challenges like I found sitting in this role is how can we get our community to be more involved in those processes, to bother to read the things that come out when they're doing consults, because if you look at the paperwork, it's just not, it's very exhaustive. It can be very difficult to understand. And when we're not giving feedback to those, it actually impacts, the decisions that are being made. So that's an area that still needs to be worked on. And my hope and my word is always out to local residents is, if you see anything that says we need your feedback on things, whether it's to do with our local board, your schools, our Auckland plan, as boring as it may sound, give time to it, because it's going to impact you. It's going to impact your children. It's going to impact infrastructure. It's going to impact your life. It really is.
So the consultation on the budget, we know it opened on Monday.
Yes.
Public consultation. The duration is until? So
we do, good question. I've literally just got the local board plan here in my book. So I think we'll get Reese to extend on that, because we've just got given those books yesterday and it's only just gone out. So there's a lot to read through.
So what does the process of the public consultation look like, apart from clicking on the link on the
So we're getting ready to host some community consultations. We've done this in the past where we usually go out to Te Puke or our libraries and so forth. So those are being scheduled right now. As you know, we've got things like Polyfest coming up. So one of the good things that our local board is doing this year is we're actually engaging the community to do those consultations. So rangatahi will actually consult to rangatahi, sports groups will consult to sports groups, and they'll do that in the most appropriate way that works for them. And we resource them to do that as well. The other thing too, again, is we've got hard copies. Not everybody's on digital, devices and using that. As we did in the last term, and we're going to do it this term, and is ensure that all of that is translated into all our Pacifica and Māori languages. That's always been a thing as well. And so those are just a couple of the things that are coming up.
So just thinking about the infrastructure there, because that sounds like a really solid comms infrastructure. This is my last question.
Yes.
Would you leverage that for the census engagement as well? Because it sounds like a really solid model.
Yeah, absolutely. there's a lot of things aside from that can be, leveraged. Again, it's a little bit more complex than that, but I know our chair will be able to actually expand on that really well, because he's been in a lot of conversations over this week, the past week, and there's a lot of new things happening, and this new governing body in our mea, and the way that they're wanting to direct things is going to influence that. And there are a lot of things that we're still unaware of because of that. So I think reserve that question for the chair, because I think you're going to get a really good beefy response from what he'll have to say there and more.
That's great.
Yeah.
Hey, Swanie, it was great to talk to you.
Thank you.
What we always say about these podcasts is that, you and I have never spoken for more than 15, probably no more than 10 minutes even.
Yeah.
And so it's a real lovely opportunity to sit down and get to know some real stuff.
Yeah.
So it's exciting, and I really appreciate it.
No, you're welcome. I'm glad I finally got to come in.
Yes.